Okay, all right. Welcome, guys. Welcome to another interview here. Here today, I have with me Javier Perez, and so some of you guys are here live with me, and some of you are tuning into this at a later point in time. And so, those of you who are here live, remember one of the most significant factors in helping you get that job and connecting and get yourself out there is using the force multipliers, not the Jedi Force, but like software. So that's really the conversation that we were having today. Because when I saw Javier's work, specifically in some of the ways in which he's pushing it into geometry and doing some just really amazing work in that, I was just like, I've got to meet Javier. So Javier, man, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Pleasure to be here.
So, the key thing, I think it was actually this beehive scene
Mhm.
that's on your art station that I was looking at, and I was like, oh my God, Holy Mary, Mother of God, this is just like, because there's no real sculpting. It's like
Yeah,
it's
it's
100%
all
substance.
it's all 100% in substance, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to get into this scene and I want to unpack this and be like, how the heck did you do honeybee as in substance? Because,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Well,
I
let
mean,
me stop you there. I want to get into that, but first I want to get into your background a little bit, like, and what you
oh yeah.
do. So, like, what do you do now? What's your day job, so to speak?
So currently I'm a senior environment texture artist at Intrepid Studios.
Okay.
We're a small little like indie studio in
Mm-hmm.
San Diego, California, and we're working on a new MMO called Ashes of Creation.
Okay.
We're about to actually at the end of this month we're releasing our first product, which is a sub kind of a sub thing from the MMO. We're doing a battle royale. So all the
Oh,
stuff you do with the battle royale, like you can gain all these kinds of cosmetics and stuff that will go into the MMO once that it comes out, and that the release date of that is like still pending.
okay. All right. Well, what is this? You said senior texture environment artist. Is that what
Yeah,
I heard?
yeah. So
Unpack that for me, because it's when we look at environment arts, because I'm on the education side, so I'm always trying to explain to people what this is. There's a lot of different
yes, yeah.
ways, and so tell me a little bit about this.
Okay. Well, when I first joined Intrepid, I actually just started with the title just senior environment artist.
Hmm.
And I think like about a year in, um, well, as I was working like in my just my regular environment art role,
Yeah.
I started gravitating more to doing just materials and texture works. I was finding myself making materials and textures for the other people on the team, which that they were using
Okay.
on their models.
Yeah.
And so, like at about a year in, my CEO or my boss noticed that like I was gravitating towards that, and he said, "Do you just want to go full on texture artist?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." I mean, and then when that happened, around the same time,
Hmm.
I actually got pulled onto the character team because the character team started needing some materials as well.
Right.
So yeah, and then from there, I was kind of bouncing back and forth between the environment and character team, helping them with materials, and I kind of just yeah, I kind of just stuck with materials. But here and there, I'll still get some environment tasks that includes like modeling and creating LODs and stuff like that. So yeah,
And this is, I'm assuming this is just because of substance came around, and it's just Substance Designer and Painter. It's just so
yeah,
awesome that
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
a
Right.
whole new job.
Yeah. When I actually joined Intrepid back in 20, I think it's 2017,
Hmm.
last year, we actually did not have any substance like designer pipeline. None of the artists were using designer. So I kind of brought that into the studio. I kind of showed it off and showed the possibilities, and then people were able to see that once I was like cranking out these textures a lot quicker and materials a lot quicker,
Hmm.
and just the possibilities of the different variations of the trims I could get going.
Yeah.
They saw the true potential, and now everyone at the studio knows designer and uses it on a daily basis.
Okay, good. So that's actually a really good point to bring up, where we can talk about trims. Because I
Yeah.
imagine that was probably one of the really powerful ways. And in fact, I don't think I've talked enough about substance with trims, because I've only talked,
Yeah.
for the most part,
I
substance in
do,
terms of just like a wall or a ground
yeah, I
color.
do actually have,
Yeah.
let me see. I think it might not be, hold on a second. It might actually be on, let's see. It might actually be on my actual portfolio page. Yeah. So these kinds of this whole like kind of modular like dungeon that we did in the game. This was actually like this whole kind of thing was actually just textured with one trim texture.
Mm-hmm.
And if I scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to even this one, you can kind of see the same kind of treatment and the same walls and stuff like that. But here's a perfect example. So you can tell from like this kind of trim texture that all these modular pieces were textured with just that single it was like one single 2048. So
And where
we
did you get this 20? What do you
sorry,
mean one single 2048? Let's start there.
how did I or what was the question? Sorry.
What do you mean? You said everything is textured with one single
Oh,
2048.
yeah, so the way the UVs are laid out,
Mm-hmm.
it's we're actually grabbing these like smaller kind of strips.
Yes.
The way we're UVing, like this kind of this piece right here,
Uh-huh.
even though it's curved, you're able to lay it out flat completely on the UV space, the UV shell,
Right.
and you're essentially stretching it over the 2D texture. So that's why you're able to like kind of, it's almost just like stacking it where you want it to go.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, and then though it does add more like texture breaks in there. Um, the problem with just games in general right now is I think we're more lenient nowadays with geometry, whereas material count is definitely the thing that is you know, hindering our ability to like produce some like gorgeous environments. Like
Right.
our programmers are always like, you know, we got to keep our material counts down, but as far as geometry, I've been very fortunate to pretty much go nuts at work with like as far as geometry. It's not as important as it is like saving on texture count and materials just because of in game the rendering. It's all happening on screen and stuff. Whereas with geometry, you can actually LOD a lot of the stuff as the player is like really far from it.
Mm. So you can
Yeah.
cut it out so it's not being
Yeah.
calculated.
Yeah. Exactly.
Fantastic. All right. So this is the big question here for a lot of people, and I see this with certain workflows with Substance Designer,
Mhm.
is Substance Designers doesn't create geometry, so they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in a lot of workflows, they will start with something sculpted in ZBrush, for example, like
Yeah.
a simple shape.
Yeah.
Um, and is that your workflow as well?
No, I mean that's basically that's what gets me to push myself to not like do that in Substance Designer is I want to see how far I can push what like without being outside of the program.
Yeah.
And recently with all the new additions that Substance has been coming out with the new like shape extrude node and being able to just plug in a flat 2D image, plug it into this node and it renders it in three-dimensional space.
Mm.
I think it's been helping a lot of people kind of stay in the program.
Yeah.
There's still some issues with clipping, which I'm still trying to solve, but for the most part, I mean, I've been getting some pretty good results as of late.
Okay. So
And
then, yeah.
or sorry, my most recent projects can definitely show that off, especially with the axe and then the bees as well.
Cool. So then, yeah, because that takes us right to the B. It's like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
how, because I swear that was as soon as I saw it, I can't remember who sent it to me, but it was like, that's not possible, you know?
yeah. I mean, it has a
Wait,
it's both.
is that the B right there? Is that the nodal network for the B?
Yes, yes, correct.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh. So yeah, if you're listening to this and you're not tuning in, the guys that are here live are able to see this with me, but that's like a beautifully,
I think I might have talked to one of your students, but I did mention that I would be going over it live on Twitch over this weekend, just because I'm
sweet.
cleaning it up. I'm going to be cleaning it up for a presentation I have at a university.
Yeah.
So I'll be actually opening the graph because this is a graph currently, but I'm just going to be cleaning it up and labeling it a little better. But yeah, and then all the nodes, like kind of the node setup is actually available on ArtStation, and like I try to make it as high res as possible so you can actually go in and kind of zoom in and see what exactly are the internals of it.
Yeah. Cool. So we can see that over there on ArtStation, and
Yeah.
maybe we can talk you into a presentation later on this.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
We'll do a little high level today.
Okay.
But so this is all a nodal network. So walk me through some of the thinking, the high level thinking, because when we talk about substance designer, we're talking about noise,
Yeah.
and so it's some kind of pattern. Like tree bark will start with like I think grunge and map 005, I think if I remember right. And so surfacing has everything to do with taking noise and then controlling that noise pattern. This is
Correct.
different though.
Yeah. So with this, more so, you're kind of throwing away all that kind of what you were saying about just basically layering a bunch of noises and surfaces. Whereas this one, when you do something like this, you're primarily thinking of the shapes. And you can see like right from the get-go, I'm starting off with these basic just like circular shapes
Yeah.
with the shape node, and I'm kind of transforming them and using the new quad transform that Substance just came out with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm basically just shifting them and moving them, sizing them, and I'm basically subtracting a bunch of stuff or adding a bunch of different shapes with all the different blend nodes. The surfacing comes later on. That those principles still apply, but it's more so towards the end when you're getting down into the nitty gritty of like the actual surface of the bee.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start off, like I think the most important thing is you want to get the shape of the actual bee down before anything else. Like you don't want to start adding all these like super like the hairs on it or like just the really like minuscule details. You really want to make sure the shapes read well and like that the actual forms, like it looks like a bee, it feels like a bee. But yeah. So I mean you can just see like I continue like through the graph. It's just a bunch of blends of adding and subtracting. It's a bunch of different masks that are adding a bunch of little small objects and stuff. Up here, this is like from here, this was all kind of the basic shape, and
Mm-hmm.
here I'm adding the hair, and then up here, this was the actual legs as well. And again, it's more just of the same. You'll constantly in my graphs, you'll constantly see me using the shapes a lot and just kind of transforming them and bending them to my will.
Right.
And yeah, it's it's a lot of work, but it
Yeah,
gets
but
there.
it's pretty amazing. So an entire bee created by using the new shape kind of
Yeah,
tool set. We'll just call it tool set.
yeah, for sure. It was basically, I would say 90% of what I used to actually create the bee was already in Substance.
Mm-hmm.
There was a few new nodes that I found on one of them. I found on Gumroad that was extremely helpful, and that was to create the actual legs that you can these kinds of legs that you see right here, because they're so curvy. Getting that curve shape is always, I've found, the most difficult part inside of Substance to get your shapes to follow a certain kind of line almost.
Yeah.
But there's this node. Let's see if I can find it. I actually used it as well in my axe. It's called, let me see. But it's the same way that I used to make these kinds of swirly nodes or swirly shapes inside the axe.
Oh, that's a great one for us to segue to, because the
Yeah.
honeybee, not necessarily going to apply that every day, but in
Yeah.
ornamentation, this is one of the biggest issues we have. Do we go in with a ZBrush and then you have to deal with the polygon counts and UVs?
Exactly.
It starts to change the conversation.
Yeah. So with this kind of I linked it actually in I linked it in actually my ArtStation, but it's a Substance Designer curve node.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically it works as exactly how it says. It's like you're essentially drawing Bezier handles inside of Substance Designer, but you're plugging in a shape, so it's kind of just following the curves that you draw.
Got it.
and you can put in a bunch of different you can plug in some gradients to give like this nice fall off at the very end, so it's not like completely solid, where it gives like this nice taper.
Yeah.
Um, Again, once you have like your main shape, it's just more of the same. It's your kind of transforming it and you're blending on top of each other to get like a full kind of shape and form. Whereas for this, essentially think like for this, I basically plugged in the sphere, and
Mm-hmm.
because and with the substance, this node, it's actually being like duplicated on this path like probably 2,000 times.
Yeah.
That's why you're getting kind of this kind of solid shape. Whereas in the B, I basically plugged in a little segment of the B leg and maybe like said like, okay, I want to duplicate this 5 times along this kind of curve that I already drew.
Yeah.
So it's easier to control and manage in that aspect.
Man, that is just absolutely amazing. This program, every time
Yeah,
something new, it's yeah, every time it always reminds me of the excitement of ZBrush back in the day, because it's like this
yeah,
is
yeah,
changing the game so much.
yeah.
So tell me, what do you like? How does this affect people getting into environment arts today? Because I've got students. We focus on props and we focus on environments. We focus on substance, of course.
Yeah.
But how does this affect, when you're hiring or you're thinking about hiring, you're looking at artists that you may want to join the team, you know, what is it that
Yeah.
they should be thinking about or doing with substance?
I mean, as far as like whenever we get a new hire or whenever we get resumes in or whenever we like are thinking about hiring an environment artist,
Yeah.
my number one question is always, do they know designer? Because right now, like if they don't know designer, 99% of the time we probably won't hire them, just because it's embedded in our tools pipeline. All we're able to share a bunch of different materials. We're able to share if one of the artists creates a small little graph, we're able to share that with the rest of the team, so we don't have to constantly keep creating that same graph over and over again.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just like it just keeps all the artists cohesive, essentially. But yeah.
So they got to have
So
substance. And then
yeah,
how do they prove that, right? Because there's got to be a threshold. I mean, so you can throw
yeah.
some nodes
I,
together and grab some things off the marketplace, and you're like, hey, I got a substance designer material.
it definitely comes down to the art tests. We at Intrepid we give a bunch of art tests. So like our when I first did my art test, all my materials were made inside of Substance Designer,
Mm-hmm.
and I sent over the graphs and stuff like that so they could really check it out. But yeah, definitely having a portfolio, not only being being versatile as far as like showing all your game environments, but also showing like your material renders, your spheres, just that we can see like that you understand just surfacing, you understand the roughness values of certain objects,
Mm-hmm.
that reads believable.
Got it.
Yeah.
Kyle was asking, with the swirl, the substance designer curves, is that
Yeah.
something where you draw the Bezier curves, or do you just let it do its thing?
Oh no no no. Yeah, you actually here. Let me see. You actually are able to. Let me see. Sorry about this. You are actually able to. I did it in my Nomen talk. I go over it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to because I ran out of time. But you can actually see it in his example here. I think on his Gumroad here. You're actually drawing these like you would like you're moving the Beziers, and you're able to actually like there's some parameters inside the node. You're able to actually curve them, and you're able to move them freely as as you're creating this object, which gives you so much more flexibility than actually having to do this by hand.
Oh my.
Because I can't even imagine what it takes to do this in Designer by hand, like as far as like following the shape and contour and all that stuff.
Yeah, well,
But
doing this inside of ZBrush,
uh,
Blender or 3D Code or any of those
yeah,
guys too. Then you got to deal with, clay brush.
yeah, you're essentially having my biggest thing is I hate being in Designer and like being almost like, okay, I got to move to a different program, I got to bake out my
Right.
maps, I got to import them into here. It's just a convoluted kind of thing where I just want to stay in Designer and kind of just focus on that.
Cool. All right. So if somebody looks like they're, a candidate, you send them an art test, right?
Mhm. Yep.
I'm sure you can't talk about the art test, but what kind of things do people do in art tests in your experience, just to give a sense? Because it's like such a black box for a lot of people starting out.
Um, well, so what we end up doing, we send them a reference image and we give them the kind of the specs we're looking for. We tell them, okay, this is the kind of poly count you should be hitting, and this is the kind of textures and materials that you should be hitting.
Yeah.
And it's usually, we don't usually send a concept. We usually gather a few reference images of stuff we like, because when you give artists a few reference images, it kind of gives the artist the ability to kind of choose from the those kind of reference images, and it gives them the kind of like, okay, what can I choose from these images and that'll be good, and like um, yeah, stuff like that. It's like essentially the reason we give them the images rather than the concept is because it gives it shows us the artist like okay, he can kind of photo bash and kind of create its own image
Mm-hmm.
from the images that we've given him.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
and then we basically, there's also a time limit as well. It's about like 2 weeks, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
and those 2 weeks we get back the art test and we kind of review from there. And based on like the results of like based on the kind of what we're looking for in the art tests, gives us a clear idea if we should move forward or not with the interview.
Great. That makes sense. And when people are, let's say, creating a portfolio,
Mhm.
if I'm looking out there, like I'm looking at your art station, there's ground cover, and the
Uh-huh.
ground cover is like tiles, and maybe there's a tree stump and things like that. Then there's bricks, and then it's bricks, but it's also like, hey, this is actually medieval, so they built it not with like polished bricks, but there's like
Yeah,
pieces of
yeah.
stone in there, a riverbed. And then, of course, the earlier example you were showing us was it was kind of like a, what do we call that? It's like, an archway, and a really cool trim sheet that's all like medieval architecture.
Correct.
What are we looking for? Sorry, I can't turn this
So
thing off for some reason.
oh yeah, no worries. So I mean, like you can see early on, we want to see early on in my kind of career transitioning to a texture artist.
Yeah.
We're looking for materials, tiling materials. As you
Okay.
can see later on into like my later on into my portfolio,
Yeah.
we're starting to get some more blends. We're starting to add more things on top of one another. We're not, this isn't just a single material at this point. We're almost creating like a composition with so many different materials, so
Right.
many layers.
Yeah, that's a
But
great point, because it can be like, if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking I got to learn substance, I'm like, holy, where do I
yeah,
start?
yeah. So, I mean, I think a great way to start is just creating like base materials. You want us to do your base metals, your base kind of muds, your base grounds.
Hmm.
And then as you kind of progress, you want to start blending these kinds of materials together and seeing what kind of things you come up with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the most appealing thing to just employers is just being able to see just the base materials, because I mean, sure, every time you see like a plain just wood planks or plain dirt, yeah, it may look like it's not as appealing as seeing like some crazy things you're seeing with the bees or the axe. But what it tells us is that you're able to get the forms correct, you're able to get the roughness values correct, the albedo colors correct. You're able to capture the actual reference of the material in like its kind of most basic form,
Mm-hmm.
without having to layer all this other stuff on it to it's almost like you're hiding like the base materials from like plain view, because they're not that good, but once you start adding a bunch of stuff, they'll look better. um but yeah.
Okay, got it. That makes a lot of sense. Start with just the tile ability, the repetition, the repeatable
Yeah,
quality.
definitely. You want to get
And
the main forms, you want to make sure the roughness reads well and everything.
is there a distinction in the job market in terms of, like, say, sci-fi, medieval, whatever, or is it just everything?
um Well, I feel like with when you're making materials for sci-fi,
Yeah.
you definitely want to stick to like kind of the hard surface stuff. But as far as like every other kind of, if you're not working on a sci-fi game, you're definitely going to be making a bunch of kind of organic shapes, a bunch of muds, a bunch of rocks.
Right.
Whereas more in the sci-fi, you're basically making more metals, more paneling, like definitely like shapes and stuff like that. Whereas like the other things are just kind of more organic. It's almost like it kind of goes hand in hand with kind of just the same aspect to it is with modeling, you know, where if you're working on a sci-fi game, you're going to be doing a lot of box modeling, a lot of high polys, a lot of stuff like that. Whereas like
Mm-hmm.
if you're working on like an open world, like, you know, environment kind of thing, you're doing a lot of sculpting, terrain sculpting, trees, a lot of stuff that'll cover the ground area and stuff like that.
Okay, got it. All right, that was
Yeah.
thank you for diving into that. I know that we talked a lot about substance.
Yeah. Oh, no worries.
Got
Yeah.
a couple more questions about substance, and then I want to get in and just talk about working in the game industry because you said you're kind of you're in an indie game studio. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So let me get a couple questions from substance, and then we'll jump over to that.
Okay, cool.
Alex Chan, any suggestions for achieving more stylized results?
Oh, stylized results. Yeah. So funny thing. I learned Substance Designer about 2 years ago, which was
Mhm.
in 2016. I had just left Los Angeles, and I got my job here in San Diego working on Temple Run. So working at an indie studio and a mobile game studio, it gave me a lot more flexibility to start learning programs and kind of
Mhm.
delving into like
Mhm.
different kind of programs, learning kind of like R&D.
Yeah.
Whereas when I'm working in like a AAA game studio, we're kind of like we're almost, I mean, we're always on the clock, but more so where time is out of the essence. So basically, here I can actually show you. So literally, when I learned Substance Designer, everything that I was making in Substance Designer was all stylized. So all these materials that you see on screen right now
Yes.
are actually all stylized. All like this was all done in Designer, and these were all stylized materials.
Did you bring in something from ZBrush, like a?
No, nope, absolutely not.
Oh.
I did actually at first. I was bringing in stuff in from ZBrush. That was kind of my first thing to do. But then slowly I was like, you know what? I think I can make these shapes inside of Designer without having to go to ZBrush. And I think I still kind of go back to this kind of methodology, but with stylized materials inside Designer, it's all about the most basic forms as possible, and
Mhm.
same with the colors as well. When you're making your color map in Designer for something that's super realistic, I tend to use my gradient node and kind of sample like maybe like 20 different colors.
Mhm.
Whereas a stylized material, I'm grabbing maybe like one or two or three. And that's because it's just giving me the highs and the lows of the texture, and you're letting your kind of height and normal map do a lot of the work for you as far as the forms. And same goes with the forms as well. You don't want to over add noise. You don't want to over add like kind of the crazy surfaces that we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier. You kind of just want to stick to the main kind of you're sticking to the main kind of shapes and planes and letting the forms really sell the material more than anything else really. But yeah, here's some more like shapes and stuff like that that weren't done or that were done in Substance Designer. But yeah, all these were pretty stylized. And you can see like a lot of it. It's almost like you can run your hand over this, and it's going to be kind of a flat plane. But a
Mhm.
lot of what sells it is the color as well.
Well,
So
Charlotte had a great question that might be the perfect way for us to segue to. So she's saying building a material is a bit like writing code. It's easy to learn the basics, but knowing how to build something from scratch seems impossible. Any
yeah,
advice on how to just start the building?
man. I always say this when people open up, like when people just look at or students look at graphs, they see the finished product.
Yeah.
They really like see like, oh wow, they see the long system of nodes. But once you really want to think of it as smaller graphs. When you really dive into it, and if it's like if it's organized neatly, you'll be able to actually dive in and see that this entire thing, it's kind of made up of like 20 small graphs that I just blended or combined together. There's no it's almost not this kind of continuation where it starts from A to B. It's almost like you're doing A to B 10 times and kind of combining that to get your final product, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So like, let me see, what's a good example? So like here, like this whole B, you might look at this whole thing and be like, whoa, this is insane. But when I clump these together, they're just these small kind of graphs, and you're using exactly the same nodes, and just like kind of almost in my way, in the way I like to think, it's almost I'm working in like a Photoshop like method where
Yeah.
I start with like the bottom layer, and then I make another kind of like 4 node graph, and I just layer that on top of that. Then once I'm done with that, I make another like 4 to 5 node little graph, and then I add that on top of that, and just continue on. And sooner you know it, your graph is going to be so huge. But like it's manageable because you realize you're just making these kind of smaller graphs, and you're kind of duplicating or even just switching them up a little bit.
Okay, so if we were to boil it down, looking at the finished product, it's just you just see complexity.
Yeah.
But
I feel like anyone opens like a really complex graph, they get kind of they get like it's like daunting just to be like, whoa, this is a lot. But you have to really dive into the nitty gritty of it and try to find where the artist is making his smaller graphs, because a lot of the graphs, I'm kind of just taking a smaller graph, duplicating, editing it a little bit, and just adding it on top again.
Great. Got it. All right. So the key thing is if you're looking to learn how to start building materials, look at other people's materials, but look for the graphs within the graph, like the.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a big thing is just start out small. You know, you don't have to make something crazy complex. Like even just making like a basic shape, you can actually save that node. If you make like a cool like shape, a cool noise that's made out of 5 different nodes, save that for a graph, and then plug it into, like, say you do another graph with a different shape, bring in the old graph that you did and just layer on top of it, and you'll get like different results. You'll get like different kind of shapes and stuff like that.
Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about working in the indie game side of things. And really what I'm wondering here, the kind of the tangent or the direction for me is, you know, a lot of the people I deal with are going to be looking for work, or they're looking for work now. And everybody thinks Naughty Dog, you know, Last of Us or something like that. Because, you know, it's great. They got big marketing budgets. That's what we're aware of. So, you know, how do we find these smaller indie game companies, or just the smaller game companies, or things like that? And then, you know, what is your thoughts on that job market?
Okay, so I would say, I mean, the harsh reality is, all right, this is probably going to be a harsh reality, but you know, I was just like everyone else in college. You know, I was like, I don't want to work for mobile. I don't want to work for indie. I want to work on something huge. I want to work on something AAA. I want to work on something big. Where, I mean, the harsh reality is not everyone is going to go straight into AAA. I was lucky enough that that happened. But I found myself, once I was working on these AAA games, I'm like, man, this is a lot of work. And sure, at the age I was, because I'm like 26 now, but like 18, 19, I have the mental capacity to kind of work these crazy amount of crunch hours. Like, what I feel like a lot of people don't understand that AAA games takes a lot of work. You're working on weekends. You're working an insane amount of crunch, which is why I kind of started looking into the mobile and the kind of indie realm, because it's a lot more laid back. Your hours are more flexible. Sure, you're not working on like some of the greatest titles ever, but you essentially have like your balance of like life and work, which I think is super important to keep. But yeah, so when I think the first indie company I worked for was Redemption, and that was for Temple Run, and that was after I had left. I started Redemption actually after leaving LA, and in LA I had shipped Call of Duty and Metal Gear Solid, and I kind of just wanted to take a break almost, because
huge projects, huh?
Yeah, they were huge projects, and the crunch was really getting to me. I was like, this is mentally a lot. So I needed to almost take a break and kind of explore other options. But another reason why I kind of went more towards the indie route was just the project in general. Before I started on Temple Run, I had actually never done any stylized art before. It was all very realistic, and I found Temple Run being a good like gateway into like, okay, this job, though this is an indie job, this is going to give me the kind of the ability to learn how to do stylized texture, stylized modeling, which will in turn give me, it makes me more like, by an employer, like, okay, this guy can do both realism and stylized, so he's a good to have kind of thing. So, I think working at an indie studio is a great way just to like get your foot in the door, really. Even
That's great.
doing like, internships and stuff like that. But yeah.
How are we finding those jobs? Is it just Indeed? Is it ArtStation? Is it,
It's a little, honestly, it took me, a lot of these jobs aren't posted online. You really have to dig and search. When I was in college, I don't know if you guys used Game Dev Map before, but I basically went on. Let me see if it's. I basically went when I was in college and I was ready to look for a job. I basically went on this website, which essentially gives, you can click on a little state and it'll tell you all the companies that are there. I basically went down from like San Diego all the way up to Seattle. I just clicked on every single one of these studios and sent a resume, whether they were hiring or not. The next day I had like 20 new emails in my in my inbox saying like, we're not hiring, or we love your stuff, we're just not currently looking. Or even, that's actually how I landed my job at Zindagi Games when I first got out to Los Angeles. Was there actually was an environment artist position. There was not an environment artist position, but I sent my resume anyways, and they loved it, and I went down there for an interview. And another big like kind of thing that I learned by applying is, and I learned this early on, even if you're a student, even if you're like a junior environment artist, apply for the senior environment artist position, even though there's not one listed on the website. Obviously, if there is one listed on the website, definitely apply for that one. But sometimes I was applying to senior environment artist positions as a junior, and they were still emailing me back saying like, oh, we love your stuff. We want to see if you'd be interested in the junior position. So that's like that's another way where I was finding jobs like super quickly.
That's great. I love that idea of just reaching right out. When you're reaching right out, are you just like, is there a contact there where you're just sending in a resume via email, or?
A lot of the times it's kind of their, a lot of the times it was just through their portal, their website portal, where it's like apply, send your resume, which a lot of the times it's, unfortunately, you're not going to hear anything back. But once you do hear back, you have their email. They're emailing their like work email. And honestly, I keep every single one of my recruiters' emails like in my inbox. Like I have like 20 recruiters' emails in my inbox, just almost collecting over the years, because I've talked to so many different ones. And it's a nice way to kind of open up the conversation again. Like, hey, it's been a few years. How you doing? Like, just always keeping up with the recruiters. Like, are you guys looking? What are you guys working on? Stuff like that. And another great way is if you really want to reach out HR instead of having to go through the whole portal, is I would highly suggest going on LinkedIn, searching the studio you want, and just searching HR and sending them a kind of LinkedIn message there. Because I've noticed a lot of recruiters on LinkedIn, they usually say like, oh, send me a LinkedIn message if you're interested, or here's my work email, which aren't publicly anywhere else but LinkedIn, which is kind of strange. But yeah.
Yeah, that is. All right, cool. Yeah. So hit LinkedIn. Oh. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Like a couple days ago, I just was on LinkedIn and I noticed that a lot of the recruiters actually put their work email in their contact info. So instead of having to go through the whole portal of like upload your resume and see if you get a response back, you can actually just try to send your resume directly to the HR person. So
Got it. That sounds great. And in fact, that was I think Adam's here with us, and he was talking about that the other day. Just applied for a job, wasn't sure he was going to get it, and next thing you know,
yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, you got the job. 3, 4, yeah. So all right. So this is really. Let me get back to this screen. So here we go. Um, when so this was so you did the hardcore. You did AAA first.
Yeah, I did AAA first. So the way I kind of got started in the industry as
Yeah.
the way I started was I went to the Art Institute from 2009 to 2012, right after high school.
Mm-hmm.
In 2012, I was a senior AI. So we had one of our classes, and one of our required classes was a class called Intrepid. We are lucky that our school had a really great connection with Sony Online Entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
which now you guys know it as Daybreak Games.
Okay.
Um, so that's the way we were getting internships, because they were both the studio was like maybe 15 minutes away from the school. So every quarter they would get a pair of new interns. So I started out as an intern there for a class, right? And after the internship, I just kind of went on a whim to my art director. I was like, "Hey, are you guys hiring? Are you guys looking for anything?" And lucky enough, I actually got hired on as a contract environment artist while I was still going to school.
Mm.
I actually was able to ship my first title before I even graduated school.
Oh
So
man.
by the time I got my diploma, I had already had one ship title under my belt, which was really nice. But at the same time, there's also kind of these downfalls with that, where during this whole, like, I was working and going to school at the same time, my grades started slipping. My projects weren't coming out as great as they could have been. I was like I was kind of jealous of all my other classmates who were coming out with these awesome senior projects, and I'm barely I'm struggling to get these projects done because we were crunching to get my first game out. So I was like, is this really worth it? Is having a having a ship title better than having all these great portfolio projects that I'll
Mm-hmm.
be soon like trying to apply to different companies with?
Yeah.
In the end, it worked out, but I would definitely tell a student, like, focus on your work as much as possible. Obviously, if you get a job in the industry, I know a lot of people like, oh, I have a job already, I'm just gonna quit school. Like, no, just finish school and just try to do your best.
Do you have any examples of your schoolwork still on your art station?
uh, Man, I don't think so. Let me look. I try to hide that stuff. Let's see.
I try
Okay.
to hide last year's stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So this right here,
Yeah.
this one was actually pretty popular on Polycount for a bit. It was called El Rancho, and this was actually my senior kind of thesis.
Mm-hmm.
This was all done in UDK
Yeah.
back in the day, and it was essentially an advanced game modeling and lighting class. And this
Yeah.
was essentially one of my portfolio pieces, like when I graduated. It was done by me and one other artist, who he works at Respawn now.
Great.
Yeah, but this was kind of the quality like I was doing like when I was graduating, and I mean, this was pre PBR, so we were using gloss and spec maps.
Yep.
And like looking back at this now, it's so hard to look at because like I see so many errors, so many things wrong with it. But why I keep this on here is just because the assets themselves aren't that great to look at on their own, but what this piece gets its point across is composition, mood, and lighting, and I feel like employers really want to see that.
Mm. That's great. That's a really good question to ask or to address. Anyways, is it important to have everything at a high finish level, or because any environment, there's so much to do. You have to have trade offs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you definitely got to focus. You can cheat your way through an environment, like as long as you get the sense of lighting, the mood, it really can capture and do so much for you. Like, even these like grand scheme crazy environments that you see in like even in games, like sure you can walk up to like the most smallest little prop and you'll notice it's not done that great. But when it's next to this grand like open world environment, it's just like so minuscule that the player won't even notice. So mostly focusing on the grand scheme of things, the whole overall picture. Um, but I had that problem when I was actually graduating, whereas employers were looking at me as a prop artist because all I had in my portfolio were props.
Mm-hmm.
So I've told this to students many times who are trying to look for environment art positions is that you definitely want to do a bunch of scenes. Like don't just do like small little props. Even if you take your small little prop, try to make it like a hero asset. Try to make it like a kind of a bigger like more I don't know what's the word. Yeah, just like a bigger prop, and then kind of just start fading, like bringing in smaller pieces, fading it in, and then eventually you'll have like kind of a full environment. You just basically start out with a centerpiece and kind of just start populating around, and eventually you'll have like an environment, even if it's on a small little pedestal. But yeah.
Okay, cool. That's good to hear. All right, and Patrick's got a question here. I think that's pretty relevant. And is this Patrick? You're in the boot camp coming up, yeah? Do recruiters require a school degree? How does that factor into the whole conversation for you?
It varies honestly. It varies.
I know HR puts it in there, but I know HR puts stuff in there just to kind of screw with people, so not everybody applies.
Yeah. It to me, if or sorry, to me, it's been it varies from studio to studio. In my first studio, my art director, he's like, oh, he doesn't have degree. Okay, let me see his portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
It all boils down to the portfolio.
Yeah.
Like I have a lot over the like 7 years working in this industry. I've had a lot of colleagues who are self-taught. They've had no like education, no degree or anything of that nature, and it's their portfolio that your portfolio is your degree. Like that's what speaks to you. But at the same time, I actually had one studio ask me what my SAT scores were.
Oh wow.
And what my GPA was, which was kind of off.
Do you have an SAT score? Because I don't.
I do. I completely bombed it. I didn't even know I needed. I actually did not even have to take the SATs to get into art school, which would have saved me a couple bucks.
Yeah.
But doesn't care about it. Yeah. So like, I would say definitely not as much as I feel like they used to. I feel like nowadays a degree it's not even on their radar anymore because sure the HR wants to see it, but I'm sure the art director does not care. He cares more about the art side of it.
Right. I think he's under pressure.
Yeah. The HR is definitely the one who's kind of more concerned about the paperwork and all that stuff, but in the end, it's the art director who's going to look at your portfolio, and he's the one who's going to speak whether you get hired or not.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I get that. All right, so let's check out your art station and put it right there.
Okay,
thanks, Patrick. And Jonathan, good to see you here, Jonathan. How's the job going? Jonathan Mercado's giving a big shout out to the Art Institute.
Cool.
All right, so right now your job's material surfacer. Is this a job people can get right from go, or do they need to start as props? Do they need to work their way up? Is this
nowadays like texture artist is actually now like a job listing on most like studios now.
Yeah.
Before, I feel like the way the industry is currently moving, I realized about around like maybe 2015, around that time, is I noticed the kind of industry shifting because these games were getting bigger and more games were producing like open world titles.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of a studio now is kind of broken up into these teams where you're either a prop artist, a world builder, or a texture artist.
Got it.
And that's definitely mostly in AAA, whereas in indie you're kind of wearing a bunch of hats because the teams are so small.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to like touch a little bit of everything. but yeah, so texture artist is definitely something that you can like that's something you can apply for, and that's something you can stick to. Um, I would definitely say stick to your strengths. I know when you're in when in college, you want to like you're doing all these environments, you're doing like all this, you're doing so much of everything. I think once you kind of land your first job, you'll eventually kind of start gravitating towards what you like to do. Um, you'll start kind of gravitating. All right, do you feel more comfortable world building? Do you feel like are you more skilled in texture creation? And
Hmm.
I feel like in in like past interviews I've had, that's the question that keeps coming up is like, what do you think is like your strengths? Like, what do you like doing textures more than world? Do you like doing textures more than props more than world? That's like something that you personally like doing, and what is like you're stronger in.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. Another question for you here, Kyle, no, from Daniel. Daniel went to school for mechanical engineering. Then he came into a character course here at GAI. Does do other degrees, other things factor into your decisions? You know, would it help him having an engineering background? Is that worth mentioning, or is it just
Um,
work?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think your other degrees help you a little bit more in as far as in an indie environment, like in a smaller studio scale, because they'll see like, okay, this guy can probably do some coding or some engineering, like
Right.
an asset in case something comes up and we're like need of a hand, like we could probably pull him off from the art for a little bit and put him on engineering. Whereas I feel like in a big studio of like 300 people, it's so like you're kind of so set to your work that may I would probably not mention it in like a bigger company unless
Mhm.
you're actually applying for it.
Yeah.
Uh, it's nice to know that. I mean, it's nice to tell the employer that you have that, but I think it gives you a little bit more points with a smaller team environment. I think.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. All right. So you have been in AAA. You've gone to indie. You've been overworked. You've done the hours. You know,
Yeah.
what do you say to people who are looking to do this as a job and they're like, this is all I want to do, and you're like, I've done this, and you know, there's pros and there's cons.
I mean, I love it. I can't tell you enough. If you want to join the game industry, I'm 100% backing you. I'll do everything it takes to get you to get you a job in the industry, no matter what. I love it. I mean, there's definitely some dark days. I've been through layoffs. I've been through games being canceled, but in the end, like you're making games for a living. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was the one thing when I was in college. I was like, I don't want to be stuck in a suit in like a cubicle for like the rest of my life. I want to make art,
Yeah.
and and art in its own it's definitely has its ups and downs. It has its struggles, but in the end, like it's probably one of the coolest jobs you'll ever have. Is just creating art for a living.
Mm-hmm. Man, that sounds awesome. That sounds like a great place for us to wrap this up as well.
Yeah,
Javier, man, thank you so much for coming in and sharing
yeah,
your particular genius here.
yeah.
That
This was a lot of fun.
thanks. Yeah, I mean, I love looking at your art station and that recent work. I don't know anybody that's pushing substance quite. There's just a handful of people out there pushing substance like you, but it's so cool
Thank
to
you.
see that model. That was awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still a little plug. I've been working on something
Yeah.
on Twitch. I stream kind of
Yeah.
every
Where do
day.
we find you? If you want to put yours up, just so those who are
Yeah,
live,
yeah. So
feel to see it.
twitch.com twitch.tv/meshmauler.
Okay.
Um, so you can follow me there. I think a few of your students are watch me every night.
Cool.
But I actually have there's like collection of small videos from like the last couple days.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, I've just been working on this kind of new rubble texture that I'm working on. Just and yeah.
All
But
right.
besides that, yeah, just hit me up on email, and I'm really good at responding with emails if any student really wants to like ask me a question or anything. And just
Super.
yeah, follow me. My handle is Meshmauler, so any social media that you know of, I'm probably on there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Javier.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. Yeah, it was great talking to you.
All right, guys, thanks for coming in and have an awesome weekend. If I don't see you or talk to you before that, um, one thing I want to end with, actually, one thing I want to ask, not end with, but ask is there like one project or test exercise you can recommend people to really dive into substance? Is that like go in and
Yeah.
create dirt, or is there any tips you can give if somebody just wants some guidance for that first step?
Um, yeah, I would say, let's see. I honestly would just open it and
Yeah,
just look at the different nodes. Just really look at like what they're capable of doing. That's definitely the one thing that I learned early on is um, you're not going to be able to use these nodes if you don't actually know what they're doing.
yeah,
So well, even though you're not connecting them, even though you're not kind of plugging them in anywhere, it's just like actually like drag them into your kind of your layout and kind of see what are my options with this kind of node? What kind of things can I do with this?
yeah.
But the other thing I would suggest for people just trying to learn substance is download artists' graphs who have them on sale on Gumroad or
Hmm.
ArtStation, and just open those up and just look at like kind of like I was describing earlier on the smaller kind of graphs that they started out with,
Yeah.
just to see how they're getting their smaller forms and kind of just start off with that before diving into like these bigger projects.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All right. Thank you so much.
yeah, yeah. It's been great talking to you.
All right. Take care.
See ya.
Great talking to you. All right. See you guys.